14 minutes before the top of the hour, Bill Martinez here. Bill Salus joins us. Bill is the best-selling author, renowned prophecy expert, and breaking it down, what's happening in the Middle East right now. And this isn't a happenstantial event. You have to trust God and understand that God is fully in control. And it's interesting when you look at all the events. We got Donald Trump out who supported Israel 100%. And we have Joe Biden in that's very soft and mushy about his support of Israel. And look what's happening right now, Bill. The Hamas and Iran are raising their shoulders and their chest, and don't think for a minute that China and Russia are not observing.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, China just put together a big deal with Iran of. I think it's 400 billion or something over a period of time. They don't have the number correct on that. That's over a period of time, over years. Russia's involved with Iran building more nuclear facilities on the west coast of Iran, the Bushehr area, the Bushehr 2 and Bushehr 3. Mm-hmm. China's trying to be involved in the peace process. Egypt's trying to take the front role in the peace process. This conflict right here is sitting at the core of concerns worldwide. Protests are going on in nations' capitals across the world. Toronto just recently had a huge protest, and there was conflicts that erupted between pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli. So this is a big deal. This has got a worldwide implication, Bill.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is, as you say, this is what we're seeing, and in fact, I'm even though you have the squad, you have elected officials here in our government speaking out about Israel, speaking out against Israel, trying to claim some sort of moral equivalence, which is, problematic. But yet it's very dangerous because what we have seen in all these processes, it starts with an idea. It starts with some words. It starts with a little seed being planted out there, creating this conflict and this narrative that leads people to believe that Israel is the problem, but people with half a mind can see that if Hamas wants the bombs to stop, well, then they're the ones that keep sending missiles, and Israel has every right to protect itself, and it's retaliating accordingly.
Right, and so before we went to the break, I was talking about we're trying to present to your listeners the prophetic perspective from the biblical narrative so they can compare it to the secular worldview, the secular news they're getting. Mm-hmm. This is the camera angle they need to know. In other words, this land over there that's heated in contest ever since Israel became a nation again in 1948, this is called the Promised Land biblically. It was land given to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15 through 18, which spanned from the river of Egypt, probably the Nile, through to the river Euphrates, which of course is to modern-day Iraq and Syria. Ultimately, someday, when Jesus Christ returns and sets up his messianic kingdom in the 1,000-year period, they will get all that land. Mm-hmm. But incrementally, like in 1967, they got some of that land, and they're going to get, I believe, more of that land, prophetically speaking, as they win some wars, and they'll incrementally expand into that territory. Now, one of those territories, we're told, is going to be the Gaza, which is where Hamas are. Mm-hmm. And it says in a prophecy written around 630 BC by the prophet Zephaniah that the Gaza will be deserted, the Ashkelon will be a desolation, and it talks about a few other places in that ancient time where the Gaza is now will be uprooted. And it says that the Lord is against, and he said the Philistines then, because that's when they were called the Philistines back at that time. They weren't called the Hamas per se. But he said it would destroy them and leave no inhabitant there, and that the sea coast, because it's on the sea coast of the Mediterranean, will become the possession of the remnant of the house of Judah. And then we find out there'll actually be flocks, and there'll be pastures there, meadows, shepherds for flocks, and this sort of thing. And then 60 years after we find this out, we hear from Ezekiel, the prophet, and he tells us why. And it gets into this ancient hatred we talked about. It says, because the Philistines fell vengefully and took vengeance with a spiteful heart. Right. To destroy because of the old hatred. Mm-hmm. That I will stretch out my hand against them, destroy the remnant from the sea coast, which is Zephaniah said, with furious rebukes. So this is not going to get any better for Hamas. They're going to continue to forward that animosity toward Israel. They're just breeding it in their children. I mean, they see all the damage going on over there. Right now, presently, with these hits that's been going on, these attacks inside of Gaza, which are self-inflicted because Hamas continues to fire missiles over into Israel.
Exactly.
There's about 40,000 refugees that have been cramming into the UNRWA headquarters over there, and this is in the midst of the pandemic. They estimate that about 30% of the Hamas are dealing with COVID-19 because this is one of the most densely populated, crammed-in areas, unsanitary areas in the world, really. So this is really a real mess over here.
Bill, help the people understand the relationship between Hamas, the Palestinians, and the Philistines.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the Philistines, of course, go back in time. What happened in when Israel was defeated in 70 AD by the Romans, there were still some Jews lingering around that didn't disperse into the nations of the world. That's when the temple was destroyed. And the Roman emperor, there was a final revolt he suppressed, and he renamed that area Palestinia because it was the Philistines. It was Israel's ancient enemy, and he forbade Jewish worship and Jews to reside there and that sort of thing. So it's been Palestine because of that throughout time, and its borders would always change different sizes depending on who controlled the area. But it was never really, Palestine was never really an understood, place. It was just a loosely defined territory.
Just a designation is all. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so Israel becomes a nation in 1948, and then you have all this violence erupt. Now, what happened in 1948 is the Arabs had received their statehoods after World War I, and they voted against there being in Israel. And when the UN voted Israel in, they told the Arabs that were living in what was formerly called Palestine to get out for 5 days because their armies would come and destroy Israel. It would not happen, but that was a miscalculation. And Israel won that war with a few little jets and some hand grenades. That's about all they had. Now all of a sudden you have these refugee camps that were spread out throughout Lebanon and the Gaza area, now it's called the West Bank, into Jordan. And so they're all sort of Palestinians per se, but they're from different ethnic groups throughout time. A lot of the Hamas over there would have come from the Philistines. A lot of the Palestinians in the West Bank would have come from what are called the Edomites. And I get into all this stuff in my Psalm 83 book. I trace the history of these people.
Right, exactly.
It's called Psalm 83, The Missing Prophecy Revealed. But so ultimately they're Palestinians, but their ancestries, of course, are from all across the boards in the Middle East. So the Hamas really are bannering the Palestinian plight. So we don't want to make any dance around that. The Palestinians are trying to unite the Palestinians in the West Bank. They're trying to get the Arabs living in Israel legally to get involved in this, and they perhaps start another intifada. So this thing isn't over yet, Bill. And at some point, it's going to get into the fulfillment of these prophecies.
Exactly.
And when those happen, those are game changers. Those are the events that God knew would impact the world that He wanted us to know about, so we could be prepared for them in advance.
Yeah, and here it is unfolding right before our eyes, Psalm 83, and it's like the chess pieces are coming in the right place, just as God said it was going to happen. But the common element in all this is this ancient hatred that you speak of. Until I read your book, Bill, I just didn't have the capacity to understand what that was, what that has been doing. And of course, we see it play out here, even in our culture, how ideologues have taken over. And it's certainly not, thousands of years of ancient hatred, but hatred nonetheless, and how devastating and debilitating hatred becomes. And this is why God hates hate.
That's right. And none of the world leaders, and unfortunately the Biden administration would be classified in that, understand this. And until they understand the roots of this hatred, the roots of this conflict, they're never going to be able to understand how it's going to resolve itself. And it's not going to resolve itself diplomatically. When diplomacy fails, wars begin. Yes. And many of these types of conflicts throughout history have been resolved militarily, through war. They've had to take out the enemy so they can live at peace. And ultimately, we're told in another prophecy that's coming that Israel will live in peace. They'll dwell without walls. They'll dwell securely. But they can't get to that position for that prophecy, which is in Ezekiel 38. Many of your viewers may be familiar with that prophecy. Right. But they can't get to that particular condition because of the Hamas, because of the Hezbollah to the north, because of the Syrian chemical weapons facing them to the northeast. And these are countries that are involved in Psalm 83. Matter of fact, it lists in Psalm 83 these 10 populations that are going to come to cut the nation of Israel off, that the name will be remembered no more. And it puts in the belligerents. It says Philistia is there, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Now, we talked about Philistines where the Gaza is. The inhabitants of Tyre, that's Lebanon. Mm-hmm. And who's inhabiting Lebanon right now? The Hezbollah. So listed right next to each other seem to be the Hamas and the Hezbollah, and a prophecy in Psalm 83, verse 7. So we're looking at this very closely, Bill.
Yeah, exactly. How this plays out, and of course, when this happens, you say a military resolution, to this, or a solution to this this temporary problem, because we know that it will not go away, because then we start heading into what we perceive to be the final chapter of it all, right?
Right. This particular end of the Arab-Israeli conflict militarily, as put forward in Psalm 83, sets the stage for the bigger things to happen. The big Ezekiel 38 prophecy that's coming, which will involve Russia and Turkey and Iran, and there's 9-member coalition that's going to come to take over Israel's prosperity and destroy Israel. That is when God stops that supernaturally. He plays his hand in that. Fire, hailstone, brimstone. The world's going to be in shock, and it says, I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel. They shall not profane it anymore, and the nations will know I'm the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. See, God is going to let the world know. He's going to put them on notice that he's a God, promise-keeping God, and the God who sent his son Jesus Christ to die for our sins.
I'll tell you, it can't happen soon enough, Bill Salus. Where this world is right now, the chaos that it's in, this is what it's going to take. The Lord of Heaven's armies coming down, revealing the truth once and for all, and letting everybody know that God Almighty reigns. Bill Salus, as always, we appreciate